Thanks. I'm going to talk about my fundamental message, and then you're going to go experience it. I was so excited to see so many of you dressed in clothing to walk. Not a lot of ties and sort of stiff clothing, a lot of comfy shoes and shorts, because you are going to go for a walk today with these people. And here's why. Because if I have one grand realization as a guy who's now got a lot more gray in his mustache than some of those photos had, and I've been doing this now for a solidly 30 years, my realization is this: that we can tell people to exercise all that we want, and it's really nice. But if we don't build a world where it's safe and inviting to go out and do that, it's simply not going to happen. Not everybody can afford a membership at a health club, thank you very much, but they could walk out the front door if we made it safe enough for them to do so. So that's what you're going to go look at today. You're going to go see real-world environments. It's a little complicated. You can walk out the door, actually hop on buses, and go to parts of the Raleigh-Durham area to actually experience real live neighborhoods, not contrived spaces, and see the challenges and also the opportunities to be physically active that everyday people face. So that's our story, and I'm really excited about it, and I'm ecstatic that Eat Smart, Move More, this whole movement in North Carolina is really getting that, and has, I would argue, for 15 years. You know, you've accepted for the last decade or so that environmental change matters. So what are we going to cover? I'm going to briefly have you do a little bit of personal rethinking about this issue in your own lifetime. So some personal perspective. Then I'm going to remind you briefly about the health challenge. This is data that I hope most of you already know because of the work you do. But I'll remind you about it. Then I'm going to talk about 6 trends that I've seen in particular over the last 5 years or so. Big movements, big changes, I would say, in the movement for physical activity, which is the real understanding about what activity-friendly designs are, what it means to create a stealth team in your community, selling the benefits, which you're going to need to do to create that team to make change in your community, the idea of policy as our ultimate goal, not just nice programs, but really changing policy at the local level, which should be what you're all working toward. Active engagement of the community, which is what walk audits are all about. Well, you're going to go do a walk, but I hope what you're going to do is say, I want some of these people who were trained yesterday to come and help us do this in our county, in my town. That would be a big win. If you did that, if you came out of today excited to do some active local engagement, I would consider today a victory. So that's what I want you to think about. And last but absolutely not least, one of the most encouraging things I've seen in the last 5 years or so is people are just out there trying stuff. No more waiting for some agency or government or big organization to do it. Those are kids from the Family and Consumer Sciences program in Weslaco, Texas. This is a small town on the Rio Grande River right on the border. And they said, this crosswalk's not safe enough, and we're going to make it safer by just repainting it with high visibility panther paws. They're the Panthers at Weslaco High. And they went out and they worked with the city and the Public Works Department, but they did it. They just said, we're going to take this into our own hands if we have to. I hope that you will be motivated to do that. If nothing else, at the end of the day, you'll go home, have a walk audit, and try something in your community. So I know that's a pretty big, sort of goal. I also think you're fully up to it. Having said that, let's start with a very hokey exercise. This is going to seem totally goofy. It's going to be like one of those, oh geez, some kind of touchy-feely exercise. Just go with me on this. Because what I want you to do to start is to actually close your eyes and think back to your own earliest fond recollections of having been physically active as a youngster. Now you have to close your eyes, and if they aren't closed, I'm going to come to you and ask you why not. Because, close your eyes, Carolyn, I want you to picture where you were being physically active as a really little kid, who you were with, and what you were doing. And when I say really little kid, I'm not talking like high school sports. Play your memory tapes back as far as you can remember being a little kid. So again, picture the environment. Are your eyes closed? Okay, just checking. Where you were, the physical environment, who you were with, and what kind of things you were doing. Get a real image of yourself way back then. Okay, now as soon as you have that image in your mind, go ahead and open your eyes, turn to the person next to you, share those recollections. Right now, go ahead and share recollections. 10 seconds each, just for 10 or 20.
I was actually Alexandria, Virginia, had a paper route, and I would bicycle the paper route.
Ride around papers?
Yeah.
Devin, what was yours?
Riding my bike with my parents.
Like in the neighborhood?
Yeah, neighborhood.
Just playing with my friends around the neighborhood.
Right in the neighborhood. Kenneth, what was yours? What was your memory?
Memory 5 years old.
Yes. Doing what?
Riding a bicycle on my street.
I grew up in the country, so it was playing on the slide and trampoline with my brother.
Okay, bring it back. So now, here's the deal. I know it would be a lot more fun to just spend the next half hour having those recollections. It's kind of neat, right? And if you looked around, I saw people being active, like they were actually climbing trees, remembering baseball, riding bikes, like literally people get animated when we're talking. I talked to like groups of transportation engineers, which are usually a fairly reserved group. They even get activated by that little exercise. They get excited, a room full of engineers. Now, I'm going to ask a series of questions about those recollections, and I want you to raise your hand if your answer is affirmative about what you were thinking about in your youth. So, for example, how many of you thought of things that occurred at a scheduled time and place? Scheduled activities. Hands up for that. By the way, this is not raising your hand. This is mark I'm a lazy bum. Elbow as high as your ear. That's raising your hand. How many thought of things where you were only with kids of the same age and gender as you? So if you were a 9-year-old boy, there were no 10-year-olds, no 8-year-olds, just same age and gender. How many remembered things where you had to be an adult present to do the activity? Look around. I want you to see how many hands are going up. How many of you thought of things where you had to have a uniform that you either purchased or were given? How many had to have an umpire or a referee to do the thing you were thinking about? Look around. How many of you remember being with a variety of kids, older and younger, boys and girls playing together? So it might have been a mix. Look at that. Wow. How many remember there not necessarily being an adult? Hands up. Wow. How many remember specifically doing things you couldn't have gotten away with if an adult had actually been there? Tell the truth. How many of you are now elected officials among that group? Troublemakers all. How many remember water being important to you as a kid? So either playing in it, swimming or fishing on it or paddling a canoe or just playing in a neighborhood ditch or creek or pond. Or if you lived in the city when they opened up the fire hydrants or finding right? No, wait, let's see water again. Kids like water. They're drawn to it. Look around. Look around. How many remember having a wheeled vehicle in that period in your life? Scooter, skateboard, bicycle, big wheel, trike, roller skates. Look at that. Look at all the wheels. This kid. Who had a Stingray bike with a banana seat? Did anybody? Is this the oldsters in the group? Only a few of us remember. You remember banana seats? Come on. Mine was purple. Ah. How many of you, if you'll allow me to use a term of art, how many remember having been what I like to call a free-range kid? Who here was a free-range kid? You know what a free-range chicken is? Were you a free-range kid? Good. Who could take off on a Saturday morning and be told, come home at lunch or come home at dinner, right? This was, how many, by the way, did that, before cell phones, right? We still managed to get out there and be free-range. Okay, last two questions are the important ones. Listen very closely. How many of you believe the majority of kids growing up today in America or North Carolina are free-range kids? The majority of youth, free-range. Hands up for that. Look around. Seem to have consensus on that. Last question. How many think it's good for America's youth that we're raising a robust and healthy generation by virtue of them not being free-range? Good thing we don't have free-range kids anymore. Hands up for that. Look around. Let's think about what we just said. As recently as a generation or two ago, lots of us remember having been free-range. It's not, even the old people in the room aren't that old. It's 40 years. 2 generations at most. We remember being free-range. We agree kids today are much less so, and we agree it's not good for them. I have one question and one question alone. What precisely are you doing about it? You know that's the underlying problem. They were, we were, they're not, and it's not good for them. So what in your work, every single day, could you possibly do to reverse that? That's the question that's before us. Anything less, and we are nibbling around the edges. When I ask a room full of parents, why can't you let your kid take off like on a Saturday morning on his bike on the Erie Canal towpath trail on his bike like I used to do, ride with my friends, be told to come home for dinner, peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a knapsack. Or how about this, as simple as walking to school every day from 3rd grade on, only with my friends, all the way through high school. Walking to school, no adult, just my buddies and I. When we ask parents why they can't let them do it, what's the first thing they say? It's not safe. Scary men with big thick mustaches are hiding out there behind every tree. The mustache men are out there. I have a 22-year-old daughter and a 19-year-old son. I don't want you to think I'm making fun of the risk that children face and that there are indeed, of course, some bad people out there. But you tell me, what's the actual percentage increase in violent crime against kids by an unknown assailant over the last 30 or 40 years? Let's pick the time frame in which the percentage of kids walking and bicycling to school, the green bars on the graph, dropped from 40% to about 15 or less, actually. And the percent being driven to school by car, the red bars, went from under 15% to almost half. It's a pretty dramatic reversal in just 3 decades. What's the actual increase in violence against kids by an unknown assailant in that time? Oh, by the way, another interesting thing happened over that 30 years. Do you know what it was? Childhood obesity rates tripled. As we get in the habit of putting our kids in the backseat of the car for everything they went to do, even the play date or soccer practice, right? Those organized, structured sports and activities that they do. They weren't riding their bike like you did, walking to a friend's house and then going. They were being driven. That's what we did to them. And indeed, over that time, what was the actual change in that violent abduction rate? Anybody know? 0. It's gone down, if anything. The National Center for Safe Routes to School at UNC, we've looked closely at that. That special issue of Time magazine also tried to look at the same question. I'm not saying that bad things don't happen and that we shouldn't be very concerned about where that might happen. I'm saying that we should fix those problems, not throw our hands up in despair and toss our kids into the back seat. That was not a good answer. By the way, the other thing that's really changed over that time, not rates of abduction, it's the width of roads and the volumes of traffic and the fact that we've consolidated so many schools. We used to have neighborhood elementary schools. Now we have giant consolidated elementary schools that are too far for anybody to walk to. Massive changes to the built environment and the policies that create that environment, like school siting and roadway design and zoning ordinances, that we made being free range too dangerous in that context. That's the context that changed in those 3 decades. And to be very crystal clear, if you want to talk about statistically what's changed from a standpoint of the risks those kids face, it would be the fact that when I started working in this field 20 years ago, plus 30 years ago, we had a disease that we called adult onset diabetes. That's what we called it. Anybody else working long enough in the field to remember when we called it adult onset? What's the technical term for that type of diabetes? Type 2. Why don't we call it adult onset anymore, Dave? Because we see it in 9-year-olds. Elementary school teachers, and you know elementary school nurses in the room here? Anybody work in a school setting? Elementary school nurses have to be trained to take blood glucose measures because you may be administering metformin to a 3rd grader, right? Type 2 diabetes. We didn't think that could physiologically happen when I started training in this field. This is mind-boggling to have changed that. Don't tell me genetics have changed in 30 years, my friends. No. This has got to be environment and behavior, or behavior as related to environment. We've got a task before us. What are, in fact, the 2 risk factors? If it's not genes, what are the 2 risk factors that have raised rates of type 2 diabetes among our population? Physical inactivity and poor nutrition. I guess that's why it's called Eat Smart, Move More. Those would be the 2 behavioral risk factors that we could change. Indeed, quick side note, my one political commentary, and I promise nothing else. If you care about lowering healthcare costs in this country, the argument about whether we have a single-payer system or a market-based system or some hybrid is ludicrous. It's insane that they're doing that in D.C. Talk about the 3 risk factors that fill our hospital beds. Tobacco use, physical inactivity, poor nutrition. Unless you talk about how we're going to do something about that, shut up! Stop talking about that other stuff. Thank you. I mean, I'm not taking a political position. My political position is, please, politicians, look at what the evidence tells us and do something about that. Okay, that's it. Sorry. I forgot to take my pill this morning. I'm sorry. I'm going to behave now. So, 2 risk factors. We're going to talk only about one today, not because it's more important. We're going to talk about physical activity. It's only because it's my perspective. It's the area that I've worked in mostly, although now I'm at Tufts School of Nutrition Science and Policy, and we're seeing there are lots of opportunities to do them both together when we talk about the environment. I don't want to be just a more walkable neighborhood. I want to be able to walk to a grocery store that's got fresh produce, right? We can do these things together, and we should. But I was actually, of all bizarre things, a competitive athlete, and I started working in exercise science and biomechanics at the Olympic Training Center. I did the weirdest event in the Olympics, actually. Who knows what's the goofiest looking thing they do in the Olympics? Speed walking. Yes, sir. It is race walking. Here it is, photographic evidence. I was a competitive race walker back in the day. You can tell it was a long time ago because we only had black and white photography back then. And the other giveaway is that those shorts were in style back when I was competing. This being the 1928 National Championships. Many will ask, Mark, why race walking? Of all the events you might have done, it's pretty goofy looking, I'm sure. And you know, you got a lot of grief for it. But the reality was, I did it because of the huge crowds at our competitions. The raving. This is, honest to gosh, the start of the 1984 Olympic trials. 50-kilometer race walk. 50 kilometers is 31 miles. So it is by 5 miles the longest foot race in the Olympics. Longer than the marathon, which is only 26. Like the marathon runners, you start in the stadium, do a couple of laps, then you go out through a tunnel, do a loop in the city, and then you come back in. Like the marathon, you start very early in the morning to avoid the heat of the day. When we finished at, 9 a.m. or whatever it was, stadium was packed, other events were going on. But at 6 a.m., if you look very closely above the Kodak sign, you can see my mom and dad right up there. That's really Joan and Rich cheering me on. Way to go, sweetheart. Just 31 miles to go, honey. Thanks, Mom, as I'm running. So I was a competitive race walker, worked at places like the Olympic Training Center, Reebok Human Performance. I learned a lot about the physiology of physical activity, and I can tell you, I'll boil the whole story down into about 4 or 5 slides here. This is the kind of the health perspective. We know we should be physically active. It's well established in the research literature. And we know it doesn't. Everybody, when they hear that, they think exercise. They think structured sports, go to the gym, work out. But the reality, that guy who we saw riding his bike on a very dangerous road in Cary the other day, who, by the way, he's not some exercise cyclist in Lycra on a $4,000 bike. This is somebody who's going to work. He had a uniform shirt on. He has a knapsack on his back. It may be the only way he can get to work, right? Maybe he doesn't have a second or even a first car in his household. Maybe the car's being used by somebody else. For whatever reason, we could do a better job of giving him an environment that rewards him rather than punishes him for riding his bike to work. Because he's doing the right thing. He's lowering his greenhouse gases. He's one less car on the road that we all have to compete with. And yet we make him take his life into his hands to do it. But he could get his 30 minutes a day that way, because that's what we know we want. If he rides 15 minutes each way, he meets the recommendations. We know that we want adults to get at least 30 minutes a day. We want youth to get at least 60 minutes a day. We know that any physical activity is better than none, that it can be broken up. Again, that 15-minute ride in the morning and 15 minutes back in the afternoon reduces our risk for essentially all of the stuff that fills our hospital beds now. The chronic diseases that kill us early in developed societies. And we know that it can be this sort of incidental activity. The guy who rode his bike to the library, the people walking downtown to shop. The bad news is mostly we are not physically active. Our jobs are increasingly sedentary. Our recreation is increasingly sedentary in front of screens. We know there's a strong correlation, for example, between screen time and youth obesity, right? Both because probably of the unhealthy food advertising they're getting, but not least of all because of the fact that it's a sedentary activity. And our transportation absolutely is more and more sedentary. That young lady there, as I showed you the data before, who rode her bike to school, is the outlier, not the norm. The norm is that line of cars in front of the school. So we should be physically active, most of we are not. And by the way, when you hear numbers that say, estimate we get as much as 30 or 40 or 50% of the population meeting the guidelines, don't believe it. That's based on self-report data, the behavioral risk factor surveillance system that the CDC collects, which is a telephone survey. People tend to tell you what they think you want to hear, not on purpose. You ask, do you get a walk regularly? And say, well, I went for a walk last week, so yeah, I get it 5 days a week, right? When in reality, when they measure objectively by accelerometer or a pedometer on somebody's hip, you get numbers like 40% maybe of youth meeting that recommendation, as little as 10% of adolescents, and fewer than 5% of adults actually getting the 30 minutes of physical activity a day it's recommended. I'm not knocking them, I'm just saying that's what we're looking at the population level. Here's the big bad news. For somebody like me who's been telling people to exercise for the last 25 years, that doesn't work. Encouragement and education alone will not move the needle on this. I say this knowing that we are full of a room of health educators and people like me who've been promoting physical activity for a long time. But the problem is the data tells me, and I'm a scientist, so I'm going to go with what the data, that that's not enough. Let me just share with you 1 or 2 quick studies. Here's one by a guy named John Jakisik, University of Pittsburgh's Medical Center. It's over a decade old now, but it was great work. He tried to get people to walk 40 minutes a day. There were 3 groups in his study. One group, he said, walk your 40 minutes all at once. One group, he said, you can break it into 4 10-minute walks if that's easier. Third group, he said, not only can you break it into 4 10-minute walks, we're going to put a treadmill in your house. So SBT stands for short bouts with treadmill. Sounds pretty good. Jump on the treadmill, 10 minutes anytime you want. Over 6 months, they did all the things we know in health promotion helps people get exercise. We taught them how to warm up before and how to stretch afterwards, and we gave them email calls and reminders. We give them prizes if they turn in their exercise diary. We give them t-shirts and water bottles, because we love t-shirts and water bottles, don't we? Right? Are you all excited? And blinky lights, obviously, Melissa. Right? We love all the kind of tchotchkes. Because why? Because it works. Over the 6 months, they all increased their exercise minutes per week. See it trending up? But from a public health standpoint, really, that's not the important question. The important question is after the study's over, and I'm not calling you on the phone anymore, there's not an exercise walking group anymore that's organized and somebody's bugging you to go to. Do you keep doing it? Does it increase? Did it plateau or did it drop off? Everybody in this room vote for one of those 3 arrows. And before you do, I'm going to give you inside information, which is this. At 6 months, they measured statistically significant increases in aerobic fitness and decreases in weight. So walking about 30 to 40 minutes a day, people were losing weight and getting more objective measurement, not self-report. They put them on a treadmill. They actually measured. So that's good news. It was working 6 months in. Now, everybody in the room, vote for one of the 3 arrows that is the overall trend for the group, overall trend for the whole group. How many continue to increase their exercise? Hands up. Look around. It's not what I vote, it's what you vote. Okay, how many believe they at least plateaued? That 6 months was enough, established the norm, get them going. Don't be afraid, own it. There you go. Good, I like the optimists. How many believe it dropped off? You losers! Oh my God, bad attitudes. I should send you all out, but for one tiny thing, which is, of course, that you're right. How many of you are health educators or do some form of health promotion where you've done some kind of programming like this? You're all the ones that voted for the down arrow, right? Because you know. You'll have that anecdotal success. The lady who lost 50 pounds, the guy who's been able to lower his cholesterol meds or his diabetes meds, right? The outliers. But you know that the norm across populations, across groups, across cohorts, is we trend to move back to the initial condition. I would submit to you, by the way, that is because we haven't changed the rest of their environment. They still live in the same neighborhood that doesn't have sidewalks or bad transit service or irregular road conditions, right? That you can't ride a bike on. They still have the same demands in their life. The interesting thing about this study is that John Jakisik has not given up on it. And the question you might ask is, Mark, but that's 10 years old. What about today when we've got Fitbits and accelerometers and pedometers? Did a study recently, just got published in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, last year. Same shaped curve, 6-month intervention. They were losing weight. After they stop the intervention, weight starts to go back on. There are tons of these studies in the research literature. Initial success followed by return toward the initial condition. I call this the stickiness problem. Our problem is not how do we get the short-term change in behavior. The question is how do we get it to stick? I want this line to go like this or to continue to trend downward. What I don't want is it going back toward the initial condition, which we see again and again in the research. Okay? And the answer is, although we know we should be physically active, and mostly we're not, and simply telling people and educating and encouraging is not enough, we know this the social ecology model, or a socio-ecological approach, actually does make a difference. Now, this sounds like geeky behavioral psychology, but it's pretty straightforward. It says, can't just focus on the individual, but also the groups that influence them, institutions like their school, their workplace, the community by its actual design, and even public policy. That only when we operate at all those levels do we change population-level behavior. And indeed, one of the great successes in public health did exactly this. In the last couple of decades, in my lifetime, what have we seen social norms change around? One of the most unhealthy habits that we've actually begun to make progress on. What is it? And what have we done that's not just focused on the individual? All right, like, we don't advertise them on television anymore. We've taxed the daylights out of it. Public place smoking bans. You can't smoke on an airplane. Enforcement on the bans on the sales to minors, right? Lots of stuff at the bottom of the pyramid. Not just, here's your nicotine patch, here's your smoking support group, your institution like your workplace. Those are all at the top. Discourage smoking. That's great. Not enough. There's a reason I draw this as a pyramid, because the foundation of the pyramid is community and policy level change. So you say, okay, smarty pants, fast talking guy, I want to get that little girl to ride to school. I can't just say, ride your bike and walk to school, have a walk to school encouragement program. That's not enough. What about if I set up a walking school bus? Who here's been involved in some of that kind of work? Walking school buses, great idea. Designated route to school that an adult will walk every day. My wife did one in our neighborhood, very successful. We had a schedule, different parents had different days. Puts at ease parental concerns about safety. That's all terrific. It's not enough. So at this institutional level, maybe we need to incorporate it into the curriculum. Learn about the benefits of physical activity. Or let's do pedestrian and bicycle safety in PE classes or other classrooms. Excellent. Still not enough. Maybe we have to do what Boone, North Carolina did, which was use, anybody here from Boone? Out that way? The trail along the sewer easement that connects the school complex. Isn't that Watauga High School? Am I remembering right? To the regional park where they have their home cross-country meets. That's the cross-country team walking, not being driven by bus, walking to a home competition. Parents could park at the school and walk, and we saw people walking dogs, using the trail. It's not just a transportation trail, it's a recreation trail. Great. Still not enough. Build the missing infrastructure, the sidewalks, the crosswalks. I like it. It's not enough. So how about back to my school where my wife set up the walking school bus, and where we partnered with a nearby church that had a big old empty parking lot on weekdays, busy on the weekends, empty on the weekdays, and we said, could parents park here instead of at the school so their kids get at least a quarter-mile walk? We eased the traffic congestion at school because we heard parents say, one reason I don't let my kid walk is the traffic at the school is so bad. So what do? Drive, adding to the traffic at the school, downward spiral. So let's break that spiral by having those cars parked down at the church, let those kids walk. But one of the problems is the crossing guard said, yeah, except now I got this line of cars and this pile of kids coming out and got a big conflict here. So the policy, bottom of the pyramid, policy change we put in place was a 5-minute safety delay on the pickup line. We said we're going to hold the car. We called it a safety delay, not a penalty, purely so that one of those cars doesn't hit one of those kids right there. So it's 5 minutes, the car line sits. We release all the pedestrians and the bicyclists. Students that are going to the car line go down to the gym and wait, or down to the cafeteria and hang out. Now all the pedestrians and bicyclists clear the grounds. Now we start to move the cars. What did kids immediately start to say to their parents? Under no circumstances pick me up at the school. I got to sit in the gym for an hour when my buddies are out playing. Now it was 5 minutes. To a child at the end of the day, it might as well be infinity, right? You know, because to them, my buddies are out there walking. And so at least let me walk home with the walking school bus, or at least pick me up down at St. Mary's. Policy is what really was the linchpin for this, right? Because now there's real incentive. My point is this. Unless we're willing to do this stuff at the bottom of the pyramid, we are just nibbling around the edges and changing behavior over the short term, but we're not going to get population level shift. That's just not going to happen. All the evidence is there that tells us this is where we've got to go with this. Here's the good news. You're saying, but that's not my job. I don't set school transportation policy. I don't write our zoning ordinance. I don't create our roadway design guidelines to include bike lanes. But the people who do are starting to care about this. And they're being sold by what is called the triple bottom line. The good news is the very things that I'm going to recommend to you to build an environment that encourages more active transportation, more walking, more bicycling, more transit use, those things yield 3 benefits. And it's not just healthier people, but it's a healthier economy and a healthier physical environment. In other words, people are beginning to call this the triple bottom line, or people, prosperity, and planet. The things we do to reduce traffic, well, that improves air quality, doesn't it? If we don't need as big parking lots, then we have less stormwater runoff, so we get those environmental benefits. We're learning that more walkable downtowns also have more resilient businesses that don't seem to have as much turnover, because if people walk, they tend to shop at multiple destinations in a downtown or business district, right? So we see all sorts of benefits accruing. We see the market actually demanding this sort of lifestyle, which I'll show you shortly. So, my 6 big trends. Let's actually think about the trends that all of what I've just done have set up. Number 1 is that the environment matters. The built environment matters. And if you were to say to me, summarize how to build such a place, I would say the research tells me 4 things. 4 things create settings where people are likely to walk, bike, and take transit more. There's a greater mix of destinations close together. So we're back to where we live and work and shop and play and learn and pray, closer together versus spread out. Second, they're well connected by a network of facilities for active transportation, walking, bicycling, transit. Third, when I get to a destination, it rewards me rather than punishes me for showing up without my car. And last but not least, it is safe and accessible for everybody in my community, all ages, incomes, races, backgrounds, abilities, and disabilities. Only when I get those 4 things in place will you tend to see people being, well, I'm going to call it a stickier environment for being physically active. If I did that walking program, the curve would go like this rather than like this. But I've got to have all of that. And by the way, I have plenty of pictures from my travels around North Carolina. I've been blessed to work with some of you over the years, so you'll recognize some of these photos from places where we've been together. Where, for example, mixed land use. Think about how many of our traditional downtowns had that, right? You had neighborhoods that were fairly compact. You had shared open space. Not every house having a giant yard, but rather the community having yards in the form of neighborhood parks and playgrounds and shared space. You had downtowns like Morganton where they've reinvested, and that's where that little movie theater is on the Main Street district there, rather than being the Cineplex out on the bypass, out on the highway, right? Keeping businesses downtown. Neighborhood schools, so that the maximum number of kids are still within walk and bike distance. The network of facilities is mundane stuff like sidewalks with appropriate curb ramps, bicycle lanes, trails like the many greenways you're building around the street, like the nearby American Tobacco Trail. In Boone, though, I remember that they made one of the streets more walkable. This was kind of an important corridor from the downtown back toward the university there, where they just striped off a pedestrian walkway with paint, and those yellow things are called vertical delineators, those markers that tell cars you're not supposed to be in there. There's a lot of data that tells us transit is a more physically active mode of travel. Regular transit riders are statistically more likely to meet the 30-minute recommendation than non-riders. And it's not because they're inclined to physical activity, it's because of the incidental walking at either end of the trip, right? If you walk 7 minutes to the bus, 7 minutes from your bus to your destination in both directions, 4 times 7 is what? Wow, it sounds pretty close to 30, doesn't it? That's not a very long walk. That's barely longer than a quarter mile. Third, when I get to the destination, is it like what we've built a lot of for the last 30 or 40 years, picture on the top right, or is it what we built for the hundreds of years before that, the main street, right? That building that's set back, no street trees, giant parking lot out front, no bicycle rack, that says come here by car. But we know what environments that invite us to be on foot. They have those street trees, benches, awnings, the buildings up at the street, the parking's behind or on street. We've got all those attributes. And last but not least, it is safe and accessible for everybody. I, as an engineer, know that my discipline has developed lots of tools, from mid-block crossing islands to roundabouts to curb extensions. Here's where the sidewalk bumps out at the intersection, shortens the crossing distance, makes the pedestrian more visible and able to see beyond the parked cars. My mom at 78, she's in the road for literally 15 less feet if that curb extension goes out 7.5 feet on both sides, right? And she doesn't walk fast anymore, but now she's less exposed to traffic. Her crossing is made easier. She's invited to be a pedestrian in that downtown. The reason I'm showing you these images is because these are the things I want you thinking about when you go on your walk audit today. Is there a mix of destinations? Or is there a network of facilities that connects them? For me, on foot. That's what you'll be on foot. When I get to my destination, does it reward me or punish me? Is it designed in a way that feels safe and accessible for everybody? Not just me, but somebody much older, somebody much younger, somebody in a wheelchair, somebody who's visually impaired or blind. Those are specific things you're going to think about when you go on the walk. Because if you're not seeing those things, then it's not sticky. You could do all the walking programming you want in that neighborhood, and it's not going to nearly be as effective because the environment is saying don't walk here. You may be saying walk here. Doesn't matter if the environment is saying don't. Regarding bicycling, big increase in our understanding over just the last few years. This is a curve we used to show where we estimated what the proclivity to ride a bicycle, like to work, would be among the population in general. And we always thought there's some number of people down here that are not going to do it, the no way, no hows. And there's some people that are already out here doing it, the strong and confident. You see those cyclists, they're out there riding and they signal and they got the blinky lights on and all of that stuff, right? And then there's a bunch in the middle, we thought, that would be interested but are concerned about safety. They've not done it before, they don't know what the right route is or where they'd park their bike when they get there. Could I take a shower at work? Does it work out? How's that go? Well, it turns out that there's research that actually supports this and tells us the numbers look something like this. That there may be as many as a third that say, I'm not going to ride my bike to work. It's not going to happen. I might ride on the weekend with my family. And then there's those that are out there doing it already, the strong and confident. But there's a big chunk. This number is larger than even I expected as these kinds of studies have come out over recent years that says nearly 60% of the population would like to if it was safe and inviting enough. So as we think about building bike facilities, and as you think about advocating for them in the community, certainly there's your strong and confident cyclist willing to just ride in the road, act like a car. This thing is called a SHARO, shared use arrow. Who's seen those? Who knows what that means? Hold your hand up if you think you really understand what that means. Yeah. So that's unfortunate because every hand should be up. Because what it means is you, the bicyclist, and the motor vehicle are allowed to share the lane. You, the bicyclist, can even take the lane and act like a vehicle. Most people don't know that, and most of those in that middle bubble are not going to be comfortable there. Then down on the right, we have a bike lane, a real-life painted bike lane. In the middle bottom, we have what's called a protected or a buffered bike lane. See that there's a strip here. It's a little wider, and those are actually parked cars that are between the travel lane and me. So I've got sidewalk, bike lane, both directions, buffer, and then the parked cars. And then over here, a greenway trail. Here's the point. As you go more in the clockwise direction around this circle, from the no protection to the most protection, you get a larger and larger portion of the 60% out there. So as you're thinking about building an environment that's sticky for a larger portion of the population to be physically active and to ride a bike, we need to think about how much more of this stuff we're going to build. And how at least we can make main corridors of that stuff that neighborhoods can connect to, that connect to schools, to important destinations like shopping, business centers, transit. You can be advocating for that. You don't need to be a bicycle expert to know that this is true and be an advocate for that in your community. By the way, to be very, very clear, lest you think this is just Mark Fenton kind of going off on this stuff, in fall of 2015, the Surgeon General published a report called the Surgeon General's Call to Action to Promote Walking and Walkable Communities. It could have been called the Holy Cow, Mark Fenton's been right all along report. I'm kidding. But what it really said was that those of us that have been saying we can't just promote walking, we actually have to build environments that are more walkable, that's correct. And there are all these movements out there that may well exist in your city, your town, your county. Walkability, livability, sustainability, smart growth, new urbanists. Many developers are now even in this movement. These are all essentially saying the same thing. We got to build environments with a single occupancy vehicle. The car is not the only way to get places. So, what's the next big development? That means we've got to develop health coalitions that don't look like what our old health coalitions were. Formerly, a health coalition would be public health department, the local community foundation, the hospital, healthcare organizations, right? All that stuff. We need planning and transportation, and even that's not enough. Now, when I tell health people to build a coalition, what's their first instinct? We got to invite everybody. I need literally 100 people in the room, and so I need not just those guys, but I need public works and elected officials, neighborhood associations, of course, heart association, cancer, diabetes, parks and recreation, the YMCA, hospitals, the big employers, the insurance companies, oh, by the way, the private development community, school and the PTO, and yes, even those wacky bicycle and pedestrian advocates. My experience is when communities try to do this, they have their first meeting and there's 100 people. Second meeting, there's 70. Third meeting, there's 40. Next meeting, right, the numbers drop off once we realize we're just doing a lot of flip charts and markers and dots, a lot of planning on the coalition. Successful communities appear to me to have formed a leadership group, or what I'll call a stealth team, not because it's sneaky, but because these are all people that are incorporating it right into their work. The stealth is that they're just weaving it into what they do anyway. So you'll notice this group, this may not be the exact group in your community. If you're in a more rural area, maybe there's somebody that's focused on agricultural and open space preservation, right? If you've got a very active downtown, maybe you've got a chamber of commerce. But let me tell you that 3 things to be on your stealth team. As you think about forming a team, a working group in your community, think about 3 things. 1, do they embrace this vision of actual environment and policy change? Are they willing to work at the bottom of the pyramid? If they say all they want to do is put on a health fair and hold a walk to school day event, God bless them, I love you, go do those things, it's not enough. You're not on my team. Do those things. I'm not saying they're bad. They're at the top of the pyramid. But they're not enough. I need the people that are ready to rewrite the zoning ordinance or change that 5-minute drop-off policy at the school. Right? That's policy. That's at the bottom of the pyramid. 2, it's part of their job to do those things. That's why I want the superintendent of schools or the director of planning on my team, because they're the ones that can help me figure out which of those policies we can change. And 3, they're the kind of people that have such reach and influence in the community that they're one phone call or email away from that larger group. Because there are going to be days we do need everybody to show up at the public hearing to say to City Council, we need to fund this next section of trail. Or to say to the school board, this is the right policy to put in place on school vending or on transportation. Right? We need them to be able to line up at the mic. Those are the people you need. Third, when we're selling to people outside the health world, I think we should be talking about economics, not 30 minutes a day. Most people will nod their head, oh yeah, physical activity, yeah, chronic disease, yeah, right, fine. But they don't really internalize that. You do because you work in this area. So I think we got to start talking about the reality that there are lots of other people that get walkability for very different reasons. These are 2 publications not from the Sierra Club that talk about walkability and walkable communities, but from, on the left, the National Association of Realtors, and on the right, the National Association of Home Builders. The left one all focuses on healthy community design and how it's desired now by a growing portion of the home buying population. Indeed, they've got all sorts of data that says we are oversupplied with single-family homes on large lots on the edge of town. And we are undersupplied with homes that look more like the picture on the right. Smaller lots in town, walking distance, and even connected homes, condos, apartments, things like that allow people to walk to destinations like schools, playgrounds, coffee shop, shopping destinations, transit. That is being driven, by the way, by 2 population groups. Yes, millennials, but also empty nest baby boomers who are saying, I don't want to have to drive my car for everything. I've done that for 20 years and I am absolutely dead sick of it. Right? I've sat in lines at pick up and drop off at school. So, 2 national organizations that are saying there are trends moving in this direction. This organization, the Alliance for Bicycling and Walking, has published a white paper, has the EPA and a bunch of other organizations saying that cities are increasingly interested in this because they know businesses are looking for communities that have these attributes. Why do businesses want it? Because healthcare costs will be lower, because employee retention will be higher, because people want to live in cities that have these quality of life attributes. Keep in mind, there's data in this study and others that tell us there is an increasing shift toward a car-light lifestyle. We used to be 2.4 cars per household or whatever. Those numbers are dropping. Lots of people are using other modes. These are the percentages of modes of travel for bicycling and for transit, and car ridership is dropping. How about the fact that even driver's licensure, that is how many people have driver's licenses between the ages of 16 and 24, has actually gone back down to its lowest level since the early 60s. This is sort of why I've got a 19-year-old daughter, doesn't have a driver's license yet, has no interest in it. She goes to school in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She said, Dad, I take the bus, train, I can get we got a bike sharing system. The last thing I want is a car in Boston, right? This is not uncommon, it turns out. And I know you're saying, well, not everywhere's Boston or Charlotte or, the Research Triangle. I get that. But small town America is seeing it too. We're seeing these kinds of reporting on where the market demand is, on the performance of even small town main streets that are more walkable. The developers are thinking about how are we going to redevelop an entire generation of malls and boxes that are now half empty or more. You know the one in your community, the first generation Kmart or Walmart that's been replaced, and the quantifiable health benefits. By the way, quick side note, go look at your town's website. I just used Cary's as the example because that's where we are. These are the kinds of images. Celebrating active downtowns and transit and their walk-friendly community award that they got. They're rated silver. Their greenways, their historic structures, their community plan talks all about walkability and bikeability and being a vibrant, active community. Guess what pictures are not on the Cary website? These. Oh yeah, we got lots of malls with big setback parking lots, and yeah, we got a lot of roads that still don't have sidewalks, but they got goat trails, plenty of traffic at rush hour. Oh, here's a horrible collision that occurred just in front of this hotel yesterday. I took that photo yesterday as we were going out to look at our walk audit route, 2 cows. Sarah, right? I'm not making that up, right? We saw that out there. Here's the point. We know what sells. We know the market is coming in this direction. This is where it's going. Fourth, if you're serious about this, then we can't just tell people to exercise. We've actually got to think about policies. One of the most important, who's heard of this idea, is complete streets. Hands up if you know the idea of complete streets. This is a simple idea. It says every time we touch a road, it will only be complete if we've taken into account 4 users, the pedestrian, bicyclist, transit, and motor vehicles, of all ages, abilities, and incomes. Can't just make a road for cars anymore. Right? So you got to think about all these modes. It doesn't mean we put a bike lane on every street. It means we always ask the question, how will a bike navigate this road? How will a pedestrian? Historically, here I'm going to be an engineering nerd for just 2 seconds. We love acronyms in engineering. You will hear engineers talk about LOS, the level of service, and ADT, the average daily traffic on a road. They make it sound really technical because they use the word ADT, right? You make it an acronym, but it's just how many cars go by a day on that road. Here's the point. Those used to be the gold standard. If I could get more cars by and have less delay, then I'm doing a better job as an engineer, right? Well, we're not thinking that only anymore. We're now recognizing that maybe if we could reduce the total vehicle miles traveled by cars in our community, or increase the percentage of pedestrian and bicycle trips, or have fewer collisions, you'll hear a little about this later today, that I'd be doing a better job as an engineer. And indeed, the Federal Highway Administration, the big guys in DC, have published a document just last year that said we can measure the performance of roadways other ways. Maybe we want to measure reductions in trip length, or maybe the economic benefits like people's access to jobs, or job creation, or the value of land, or how about health and equity benefits like improved physical activity. Those could be ways to measure the performance of roads. You're not engineers, you don't need to know these details. What you need to know is these tools are in the engineer's toolkit now. So that if we as a community ask to look at our roads differently, engineers have tools with which to do that. Don't let them just tell you, no, it's all about moving cars. Don't take that answer anymore. Don't accept it. That's our job, because they'll do that. Some will. It's easy to do it the old way. It's also unacceptable. Along those lines, one of the things I've helped a number of communities do, it's a very simple change. Normally, when we're building something new like a Walmart or a housing subdivision, we do what's called a traffic impact analysis. We estimate the number of cars that are going to come in and out of there, and often we ask the developer to help us pay for a new signal light or a turning lane or lots and lots of parking out front. But what we really should do is do what's called a multimodal transportation analysis. We should estimate how many people might also walk, bike, or take transit here. Especially important when we're building a new school, but also senior housing, shopping areas, other kinds of destinations, recreational facilities. And if we've talked about those other modes, maybe we'd say, well, we really need to have a sidewalk. If not, bring the building right up to the street, at very least a good connector. How about undercover parking for employees, bicycles? How about a good connection to the transit stop? In other words, talk about all three modes. Again, not a big deal. Most communities, this is a procedural change in the planning department. But if you, as a person in health, could go to them and say, are we doing this yet? Multimodal analysis, and if not, why not? This is not a hard thing. Probably council doesn't even have to vote on it. No county or city level government even has to say yes. Staff might be able to do this. We also have these things called zoning ordinances and design guidelines, which dictate whether the building is at the street or set back, whether we have small or large lot sizes. And we're seeing communities across the country begin to change and say we want our zoning to ask for more of this and less of this. What's interesting is the national chains are okay with that. That's a subway. It's up at the street, the parking's on the side, there's a little seating area out in front. These are a number of businesses, also all national chains in this little town of Tinley Park up in Illinois, that's done all of this. It's possible, is why I'm telling you this. Yes, even the Subways of the world and the Walgreens and the Walmarts. One of the best ways to get your community there is to engage your residents in this conversation, because it turns out people who are not technicians know they want this. And you see it when you take them for a walk. So that's why you guys are going for walk audits. These people are on walk audits in communities I've worked before. Louisville, Kentucky on the left, Kingsport, Tennessee on the right. Notably, getting residents involved in the process gives voice to these sorts of ideas so that elected officials and board members and so on can actually do what we're talking about. In Louisville, we very specifically did one of our walk audits with the School for the Blind on the top here, on the bottom with one of the senior centers. We did one at a school, we did one in a downtown business district, so we got business perspectives. And they added dramatically to the breadth of the conversation. On the right, when we were doing Kingsport, Tennessee's walk audits along their green belt, we ran into these kids and we asked them about it and we said, tell us where all the goat trails are. Those are those informal pathways, like the dirt path there that's worn. They say, oh yeah, there's a shortcut into this neighborhood, there's a shortcut to that mall. Every one of those is a potential path, right? If people are already wearing it. And we asked them about this hole in the fence. I was telling the group yesterday and we said, do you guys know who put that there? They go, no idea. That's like behind a Walmart. And we said, what would happen if we sealed it back up? They say, oh, it'd be down in a day. Right? They didn't know anything about it, but they know it wouldn't stay there very long because it's the shortcut from a neighborhood and from the trail to that Walmart, which made us think, well, why aren't we instead opening it up, putting an archway, and actually putting an actual path there? Right? Getting the local input is one of the best ways to understand where the demand is. So usually walk audits, like what you're going to do today, consist of about 5 parts. An introduction and a visioning exercise where we say, what do we want our community to be a decade or two from now? A presentation like this one, which is what you're getting now. Going for the actual walk, you're going to do it, and some of you will be walking in environments that look like that. I need to forewarn you. We've picked real worlds. Mary B has done a magnificent job of finding neighborhoods and areas that look like a lot of the streets around the state. So you're not going to always be on a nice wide sidewalk in a comfortable setting. So you're going to have to be careful and look out for yourselves and one another. And also recognize somebody else is trying to walk there all the time. Then when we come back and after a walk audit, the most important part is to capture the best ideas from the group. So when you're doing a workshop in your community, we often come back and give them aerial photos and maps of where they walk so they can capture their best ideas and share those ideas with one another and set priorities for action. That's where this really sings, when you actually think about next steps. What we're going to do today is after you go for your walk, you're going to come back here and over lunch, sit as a group and discuss what you saw, what you experienced on your walk, and come up with a couple of ideas for there that you might recommend. And we'll even do a quick sharing at the end of lunch, just to get a sense of the kinds of ideas that come out of having been out in the environment. It's very different than looking at maps and photos and talking about it theoretically. So we look forward to doing that with you. Last but not least, what's really promising to me is that communities around the country, when they do this exercise, actually decide to go try something. So I did walk audits in Whitefish, Montana. This is in western Montana, small town outside of Glacier National Park on the west side. And they said, we've got this big school complex, high school, middle school right there. There's some fairly wide streets in the neighborhood, but parents don't let their kids walk a ride because traffic kind of speeds along those streets. I said some of these streets are wide enough that you could create a bike lane or even a buffer, a protected bike lane. So during Walk to School Week last year, rather than just have a one-day event that has sort of the excitement of activity and then it drops off, remember the non-sticky curve, instead they said, we're going to test this idea. So they had a pop-up protected bike lane for Walk to School Week. A lot of people said, it doesn't matter, nobody's going to ride to school. I mean, it's a nice idea, but that's not part of the culture here. Parents don't let their kids ride their bikes to school. That's the schoolyard during the week, full of bikes, overflowing with bikes. They had to have a person hang out by the bikes during the day because they couldn't all be locked up. I have since been to Whitefish and apologized for not having put the photo in, I forgot to do it, of the bike lanes that they've now striped on the road. Because they know, and they've just painted one, but they're now looking at doing a protected bike lane with actual buffering little deflectors like this along it. But the bottom line is, the act of doing this became much more than a one-day event because now they're thinking about a permanent change to that road, and in fact have done some. In Livingston, Montana, we saw a very big intersection near the school, and I said, you know, this is the kind of intersection that might do well with a small roundabout. Now, I know what the reaction to roundabout is, particularly in communities that don't have any before. Oh my God, Satan himself will come to the earth's surface if we put a roundabout there. Has anybody had a roundabout go in your community and seen the uproar, right? Absolute apocalypse, end of civilization as we know it. Oh no, our older drivers will get caught in it and never get out. They'll just go around forever. So I said, why don't we just try one? Do you have any materials that are sort of perishable that you have a lot of out here in western Montana, like Osage hay? And so we made a hay bale roundabout. Anybody could plow into it, no harm. It was actually a great way to test it because it was near where they also do their farmers market. So we wanted the farm trucks to come in. Could they navigate around it? Right? Because if they can't, then it's the wrong size. We haven't gotten it right. It was a wonderful way to test it. My point is, oh, and by the way, you'll notice they created a temporary bike lane here and a nice curb extension here at the crosswalk right near it. They also had valet bicycle parking at the farmers market. In these towns, Tinley Park had a build-a-bench competition, build an artistic bench. Here used the Walk Your City, this is Macon, Georgia, where they wanted to see would pedestrian wayfinding help people walk to our destinations like our dining districts and so on. So they went to the Walk Your City website and made this kind of guerrilla wayfinding and tested it out, just added it to streetlights. Great way to test wayfinding before you invest in more costly signs and so on. In Montpelier, Vermont, they took 2 parking spaces and made a mini park or parklet. Who's seen parklets anywhere in the area? I know that some of the cities are doing this. In this case, built by the local vocational school's carpentry program. With great pride, there's a plaque on the side saying these students in the VOTEC carpentry program proudly offer this. By the way, local businesses donated the lumber, the kids donate the labor, no cost to the community, and they've put it in there. It's magnificent. And there's a little coffee shop here. It's become a social congregation area right on their main street, and it slows traffic. Some of you may know the work that West Jefferson's done to make the streets calmer and slower by virtue of using fairly inexpensive treatments in some cases, paint, signs, things like that. This is a curb extension in, of all things, Queens, New York, where inexpensive, they're doing it with vertical delineators and paint. This is a tiny little speck of a town out in northern Vermont called Walcott, population under 500. Their little business district is down here. Here's where the town hall and the post office are. That's the community parking area down near the business district. They say nobody walks from the business district to the post office, even though they're normally coming down here to do those things at the same time, right? Because they have to cross this parking lot where cars pull in and out everywhere. It's kind of a free fire zone. So we did our walk audit, like you're going to do today, and I said, have you ever thought about just kind of delineating a walkway across here with some paint or some planters? Do it inexpensively first. Within 2 months of the walk audit, they had bought these planters, turned them into a community garden, herbs and vegetables growing in there, and it creates a walkway across the parking lot with a clear entrance here and here, but now it's not a free fire zone. They're now talking about creating a park space and so on, all emanating from fairly modest, right, low-cost interventions. Don't tell me your town doesn't have the money to do this stuff. Don't let some official tell you we can't afford. You can say, can we try it? Can we try it short term? Can we do a little pop-up, a temporary treatment to see whether it would work? Billings, Montana did just that. As part of their Safe Routes to School program, sound familiar now, they identified this as an important mid-block crossing opportunity. Public Works says we don't have money to put in a crosswalk. They said, could we at least do rubberized curb extension to narrow the road, slow the traffic, high visibility paint here, and signage? They say, yeah, we'll try it, but we don't think anybody's going to walk there. They leave it in place for years. Literally, when this road, Poly Road, got repaved 2 years ago, they did this to the road. They made those permanent curb extensions because so many kids had used it as a crossing as part of their walk to school program. right? Being willing to invest in the inexpensive trial early made it much easier when they were doing the road redesign to say, oh yeah, we can justify adding these now. By the way, they added bicycle lanes. They've made this thing a complete street. This becomes a very complete street now by virtue of the work that's been done along it. And I proudly will tell you this last story of these inexpensive treatments. This is a bike rack in North Adams, Massachusetts. The local vocational school was asked to design them. They wanted more bike racks downtown. They didn't have the money to buy them. Votex said, we've got a great welding program. We'll design and build them if somebody will just donate enough money for the materials. You'll notice the town is North Adams, Mass. Look at the acronym, N-A-M-A. Everybody see it? So that's their iconic North Adams, Mass. bike rack. My town is Situate, Massachusetts, where one of the school's mascots are the Sharks. When we were redesigning our library, they were asking for donations. My wife and I say one of the particular things we want to do is support the bike rack out front. We went to our local Votex school, said, would you guys design an iconic bike rack for our new library? That's what they came up with. I was blown away. Tears to my eyes, actually, every time I tell the story, because these kids worked really hard. They told me about how they thought about at a library, there are going to be adults, but also a lot of kids coming, so they wanted the rack to have different heights. So you'll notice, see in the curvature of the shark, little bikes, big bikes. Everybody get that? Does everybody see that that's a shark, by the way? Okay, I just want to make sure. My head's there in the dorsal fin. This was one of the happiest days of my life. These kids were so proud. Plus, I have never been to the library there's not a bike in it now. It's sort of a thing to go to the library. You want to ride your bike so you can use the shark, right? It's fantastic. By the way, I don't know if you can see it. No, you can barely see it. There are two people that are also bike racks here. They're sort of the features of people swimming away from the shark out in front of it, escaping. That was the humor that the kids had to add to the design. None of these things were particularly expensive. I've just given you a host of ideas that are reasonably inexpensive. You can go to this website. TrailNet is a pedestrian advocacy, pedestrian and bike and transit advocacy organization in St. Louis that sort of summarizes how can you try these kinds of things super cheap just to get them out there and give them a trial. And I'll end with this last example of this, because I want to leave you with the notion that you could go home, hold a walk audit, find an area of need, partner up with some locals, whether it's the Votex School or in this case, the Family and Consumer Sciences program at Weslaco High School that has a WOW, Working on Wellness program. Right? So this is these kids' mission, wellness. And they decided the wellness thing they had to do was make it safe to walk from their school, which is in the distance there, across this 4-lane road to South Texas College, which is over here across the street. So there's the high school on that corner, South Texas here. Kids are constantly going back for vocational training, for continuing ed, for senior classes. They said, we need crosswalks. We want to make high visibility crosswalks. This is a drawing they submitted to the Public Works Department. This is what the crosswalks looked like before, by the way, really worn away, horrible. But most importantly, they say cars never yield. You stand there and wait and wait and wait, and then you still end up having to run across hoping that you make it. So they proposed this, and to the credit of City Council and Public Works, they said yes. Indeed, Public Works came out and first striped the high visibility retroreflective paint, the white lines, right? This is them cleaning and striping. Then they helped mix up the paint because they needed the school colors, purple and yellow, which is purple's not one of the standard colors. So they were happy to mix it up for the kids. Then they make these templates. These guys got into it. This guy was fantastic. He's an artist. He makes these beautiful stencils. They teach the kids how to use the stencils, but they let the kids do the work. It was one of my most fun days in this work ever. Standing around. When the media came, they wanted to interview not us, thank God. They wanted to talk to the kids, which was fantastic. It made a news story that the town embraced. This is the sidewalk when it's done. In fact, the kids were so bummed. They said, oh my God, it's getting so dirty so fast. I said, it's a road. That's going to happen. What you want to know is that what you've done has made everybody aware. We indeed went on and did a walk audit to a nearby nature center that the school is working with. They now are advocating for what's called a lane reduction or a road diet on this 4-lane road because it should be reduced from 4 to 3. And I'm going to tell you this. If I had come in, if Mr. Expert Consultant Guy had come in and said this road would be good for a road diet and you could put a roundabout in here, would have never gone anywhere. If these kids continue their advocacy, guess what? Who's going to say no to them? If they have the data on their side, and I can help give them that, right? I can give them the evidence, we can build the case, we can do the analysis, but in the end, if the kids are the advocates, this is going to happen. And why is that so important? Because here's what we know. Those kids, and indeed mine, and many of your kids and grandkids and nieces and nephews, are part of the first generation that's going to end up with statistically shorter life expectancies than their parents. You guys, it's not because of Zika or Ebola or avian flu. It's because of the diseases of sedentary lifestyle, poor nutrition, and tobacco use. What can we help them do? We can help them eat better and move more, right? We can help them if we change the environment so that they can actually cross the street again, so they can be free-range kids. That's why we have to do this. It is a privilege to talk to you. I am honored. I was honored to work with the group that you're going to get to walk with today. Here's my summary. The environment matters. Programming is not enough. You've got to form a stealth team back at home. You're going to sell the economics, target policy change, not just doing the programming. Engage your community through active things like walk audits, and then go out and try stuff. Try stuff like the pictures that I just showed. So here's what's going to happen next. You're going to go for a walk with some of the very leaders that were working on it yesterday. But let me remind you, I want you to think about 4 things. While you're on the walk audits, don't just look at the sidewalk. 4 things. Mix of land use and destinations, quality and connectivity of the network, the details of site design. Is the building up at the street? Is it set back? How do I get to the front door? Where's the bike rack? Is it safe and accessible for everybody? You're thinking about all 4 of those. While you're walking, you're going to actually think about those things on the terms of a 0 to 10 scale. Your leaders are going to say to you, while we're walking, we're going to stop at points along the way, and they're going to say, how was that last section that we just walked? On a 0 to 10 scale of all the things Mark talked about that influence stickiness, was it a 10? Are there lots of destinations? Is it safe? Is the sidewalk in good shape? Or is it a 0? Or is it somewhere in between? So you're going to say that number. They're going to actually pass their hand over the group and say to you, give me your number. And you go 5, 2, 7, 1, 1, right? And then you're going to talk about why you gave it the score you did. So it's going to be an active process. You're not just out walking and looking at it. You're actively engaged. You're looking at how other people are using the environment. You're scoring it, and you're having conversations about that. That's the process that we would love you to then take back to your community, using these leaders to engage people in thinking about what can we do to make it better. And while you're doing that, you can even think about what programmatic stuff might I do, what physical projects might I do, what policies might we put in place, what could we try in my community that would do this? Well, do that out here. As you're doing the walk, be thinking about that, because over lunch when you come back, I want you to think about those 3 Ps, programmatic, project, and policy change that you might make here. Okay? So that's what's going to happen next. Thank you guys very much. Really looking forward to it. Thanks.